My name is Jarie Bolander. Welcome to the Entrepreneur Ethos podcast. On this podcast, we're going to take a deep dive into the traits, values, beliefs, and skills of all sorts of entrepreneurs to learn how to build a more ethical, inclusive, and resilient world. Let's get started.
Parker Olson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here, even remotely. Maybe one day in person, but
Yeah, that'd be super cool. Well, you're the founder of Forage, which I cannot wait to dig into because it has a lot to do with mushrooms, and I'm a big fan of the mushroom. You're also doing a lot of stuff in private equity and AI, and you're like a multipreneur like me. It's sort of like there's too many cool things to do. I wish I could do them all, and I try, and then things happen. But
it's a blessing and a curse.
It is. Well, it's interesting because it's just curiosity, right? Like, what's the only job where you can be super curious? It's entrepreneurship, right? And make money too, or at least try to.
In theory.
But before we dig into all that sort of fun stuff, as I always like to say, why don't you tell us how you got to do what you're doing today?
Man, that question could be answered 1,000 ways. I mean, to your point, right? It's like, I feel like what I'm doing right now is because I was curious, 6 months ago, a year ago, and a decade ago, and then did something and that's got something else. So I guess how I'll answer that today is what brought me here today, is really because I didn't have friends. I guess we'll start there. So I think that's a good one. So I moved to Seattle back in 2016, 2017, maybe. I should know that. And didn't know anyone out here. And, a colleague invited me to a weekend, like beach trip over Memorial Day weekend or Labor Day weekend. Whatever this past weekend was in September. And anyways, I just, met a couple guys. They were cool. And they were like, we're going to do an Ironman. You should do it with us. And I was like, yeah, sure. I was like, I'm in. And for me, it was because I didn't have any friends and I wanted to meet. I wanted to make friends and was like,
Man.
I went home. I paid the $500 and was like, oh shit, that's really expensive. And I looked at the distances and was like, oh my God. Like from that day forward, I was genuinely afraid of dying on the course. Like I was in okay shape. Like I ran when I was young, but I was doing anything. But it afforded me some friends, and we would hang out and train all the time. And I actually live with one of them right now. He's my roommate. Another one lives next door, and we're all really good, really close friends. Slight side story, but actually one of them and I formed a very platonic domestic partnership this past weekend, sort of as an excuse to throw out a really fun party. Anyways, so I get into Ironman training. I get into learning all about nutrition and fueling and training and heart rate zones. And from that got really sort of compelled and intrigued about nutrition. So it became pretty clear to me of okay, what I consume impacts how I feel and how I'm training and performing and whatever. And that kicked off what ended up being an 18-month experiment, right? So I needed friends. And so I signed up for something I felt super uncomfortable about. And then I was training, I learned about nutrition. And then I got really kind of curious about, okay, people are eating vegan. Why are people eating vegan? Why are people eating keto? And I spent 18 months for 30 days at a time trying different nutritional regimens. So you name the general nutritional diet, I probably tried it within that 18 months. And it was cool. I learned a lot. There were some months that were better than others. And one of the best months that I had was supplementing with some of these functional or medicinal mushrooms. So this is kind of one of the starting points of mushrooms for me. And are you familiar with any of these mushrooms at all?
Oh yeah, very much so. I'm familiar with turkey tail,
cool.
lion's mane, psilocybin.
Cool.
All those,
all the above.
All the above. Yeah.
A quick side point for anybody listening and trying to have a good takeaway here early on. We actually don't use turkey tail in any of our products. I sell a food-based product that's fortified with these mushrooms, so you get the benefits. There's a reason we don't include turkey tail, which I'll touch on in a second. But when anybody asks me, okay, what's the one mushroom I should be consuming every day? I say turkey tail, hands down.
Yeah.
So anyways, I got, really interested why I felt so good supplementing with these mushrooms this 1 month. And, next thing I know, I'm at the local apothecary buying all sorts of different herbs and mushrooms. And then I am at the local mushroom club monthly meetings. And then I joined that mushroom club, and then I got into mushroom foraging. And then I actually ended up sitting on the board of this mushroom society. It's the Puget Sound Mycological Society. It's the largest mushroom club in the United States. I sat on the board there for 2 years and just like went all in on mushrooms. I don't know. I thought mushrooms are super cool. And a little bit of, I think some people have maybe a skewed interpretation or understanding of mushrooms in their mental model. And so I like to, try and communicate about mushrooms in the following way. So a lot of people think mushrooms are black and white, right? You have like, I don't know, portobello mushrooms over here, and you have like deadly / psychedelic mushrooms over here. And that's it. It's like black or white, right? The reality is like mushrooms or the kingdom of fungi exist on a broad spectrum. So, right. So, you have like maybe portobello mushrooms over here, and you have like death cap mushrooms over here, which are a highly lethal mushroom. Now, along that spectrum, maybe all the way on the left, these are more your edible mushrooms, right? So, portobello, white button mushroom, brown button mushroom, coral mushroom, whatever. And then you start to move over, you get into more of this medicinal or functional mushroom category. So, different mushrooms that have different medicinal compounds that have basically added benefits for your body. So it isn't just protein, right? Lion's mane, for example, is the best synthesizer of a chemical in your brain called neurogrowth factor, which is what your neural cells feed on to actually grow. Turkey tail is used as a cancer treatment around the world. So you start to get into these mushrooms that have really interesting, cool medicinal compounds in them. Fun fact, some people know, some people don't know, shiitake mushrooms actually have medicinal compounds, but a lot of people think they're just an edible mushroom. Well, they're both. They're cool. And then from this functional medicinal mushroom, that, maybe then you start to slide over more to like the psychedelic world. So yes, there are psychedelic mushrooms, but there's also like medicinal mushrooms that maybe have some psychedelic compounds. And then from there, then maybe you get into mushrooms that make you sick, or like there are some mushrooms that have been known to paralyze your body. And then maybe you get into mushrooms that are lethal and deadly. And that is sort of like, I guess, how I like to think about the spectrum, where like it isn't necessarily black and white.
No, totally. Like just like anything, like it's everything's a
True.
spectrum, including people. But I think the one burning question that I'm fascinated with is, did you finish the Ironman?
Fair question. Yeah, I did finish the Ironman. I finished the Ironman, and I've done two other sets, two other half Ironman. So I just did a half Ironman, 6 months ago. To me, it's like I am performing best at work when I'm fully in train mode, because there's just something about being in really good shape. And when you're working really hard at something, during the day, and you go and train and you're working really hard, it's like allows you to like turn off one part of your brain and like turn on the other one. See, I'm really into that. And, for what it's worth as well, like it was a huge mental shift for me when I first completed it, because I thought it was, excuse my language, I thought it was crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
And then you go and do it and you're like, what else do I fundamentally believe is crazy?
Yeah.
That isn't crazy.
Yeah. I've finished an Ironman, done a bunch of half Ironmans. This is a long time ago. I don't do it anymore. My poison now is jujitsu. So,
cool.
More jujitsu now, right? But I remember training for the Ironman, 20-hour-a-week endeavor. It's a part-time job. And I mean, I trained for 9 months and I was already in shape, right? So you just like, I'm just going to roll off the couch and do this. It's like, okay,
we trained.
No, I know, but like, you're like, it's cut above, right? Yeah. But I just remember, that swim, literally the first 100 yards of the swim, I cramped up. I'm like, no, this is going to be a bad day. But, after a while, you just sort of get used to it. And I finished. I didn't blaze a trail in terms of, speed, but I got through it. And
which races did you do?
I did the Vineman for the Ironman distance. And then I would do like all sorts of half Ironmans and Olympics. I was into open water swimming. So I did like Escape from Alcatraz a bunch of times.
Cool.
Just silly, my friends and I used to have this mantra. That's a horrible idea. Where do I sign up? Right. And it's like the mentality of the entrepreneur too, I think, in some ways, it's like, this is a horrible idea. Okay, how do I get involved with this? But not in a,
Totally.
not in a way that's kind of not evil. It's going to be hard and miserable, but miserable in a enjoyable way. Not a lot of people understand the enjoyment of putting yourself through 12, 13 hours of misery. Wow. So lots of interesting on the mushroom thing. Cause my experience with them is, my wife, Jane, had leukemia. She died leukemia 6 years ago. And literally the book I wrote about it just dropped a couple of days ago.
Yeah, Tuesday. You should give a quick overview on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Ride or Die, Loving Through Tragedy, a husband's memoir, went live on September 5th. I think we're recording this a couple days later. So, it's the story of what it's like to be a caregiver to a sick spouse and all the challenges that ensues. But one of the reasons I know about turkey tail mushrooms is that was one of the things we tried to help her. Didn't work all the way, but when you're in that situation, you pretty much try anything you can do. Like, well, it says drinking a smoothie with all the spinach is going to help. Well, then let's go. You just do what you got to do. But I'm always fascinated by more of the plant-based natural remedy, to things that are, because, I don't think it's controversial to say that cancer is a metabolic disease. There's obviously things that are impact that, your demeanor, your diet, or whatever. We never knew why Jane got leukemia, but it's like every little thing you can do to kind of keep the organism healthy, keep the host that you're in, as Stamets would say with his host defense mushrooms, stable, is probably a good idea. So,
yeah,
wow, like you just
did you guys ever look at any like psychedelic medicines or substances?
Not at that state. That was so, she died 6 years ago. We were going through that. The one thing we looked at was Rick Simpson oil. I don't know if you're familiar with Rick Simpson oil. Do you know what that is? Rick Simpson oil is a massive concentration of marijuana, cannabis. So you basically concentrate it down to this really thick oil type. It looks like tar, or like molasses. Actually, molasses is probably what most people think. And one of the protocols was to just massively dose up on this Rick Simpson oil, which we tried to do this. At the time, in California where we were, it was legal with a card, medical marijuana card. So we both got cards, and we tried this protocol. And when I'm saying massive dose, it's like heroic dose of marijuana that would make you hallucinate. And the thought process was that if you know anything about cannabinoids and cannabis in general, is that they're anti-inflammatory. There's just a lot of good. They don't know exactly why, but there's kind of like mushrooms. Like there's some properties that this Rick Simpson oil was really good at kind of helping. So especially metabolic stuff. So she also used cannabis to eat, chemo just to wrecks.
Right.
Wrecks your, yeah. So she used it to help her appetite. But yeah, we never did like the psychedelic journey with her to help her get through the anxiety of dying. She had other drugs like Ativan and other things that were like of the dozens of drugs I had to give her daily. We had the Ativan and they had the Percocet. This cocktail of like, okay, feel a little anxious today. All right. I mean, I would have known about psychedelics back then. I probably would have said, hey, you should try a little journey here.
Yeah.
Interesting. So pretty much a deep dive. Anything you do is a deep dive, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like similar to you, but I don't know, these trends, come around, right? I feel like a lot of this ends up becoming really opportunistic, right? I feel like a lot of people who are interested in entrepreneurship, everyone wants to know, like, what's the first step, right? Like, what do you do? Or like, what should I have this great idea? Like, what do I do? And the reality is like, you just have to like keep pulling the thread. Like, if you just want the the thread to turn into a sweater, it's not going to happen, right? The idea isn't just going to become a business overnight. And I think a lot of oftentimes like bootstrapped or sort of organically grown, businesses through entrepreneurship really come, to your point, out of curiosity and somewhat opportunistically, right? So I think about like some stories in sort of my, and sort of, I don't know, like our experience with forage, right? So, I basically got really into mushrooms because I didn't have any friends. And then I started, putting mushrooms in my own foods. And then, next thing I know, I'm just like, oh, like, do other people like this? Or I should look into mushrooms, and realize, got into the research, and there's a lot of interesting research there, and the market's developing. You're like, okay, that's interesting. And then, I found myself at a startup conference, and Sam Parr's HustleCon. Sam Parr, some people know him.
Oh, I literally do know him, and I was actually an investor.
Oh, really?
A small investor. Yeah, no,
Cool.
I used to talk with Sam. I used to actually go to his office occasionally, and we would just chat about stuff, because it was kind of cool, because he had moved to San Francisco, and it was funny because my late wife Jane was a publicist for professional athletes, and so all of these professional athletes, they always wanted to go do startup stuff. They're like, oh, what's this start? We want to learn how to invest. And so she would just like trot me out as like, hey, Jarie's an entrepreneur. He was at 500 startups. He knows some people.
Yeah.
We'll bring the athletes in, and we'll just tour them around town. This was since, where I live in San Francisco. And one of the tours we would always go to was the Hustle, to be like, and this is Sam, and this is what he does. And it's like, oh my God, then we take pictures and stuff. But yeah, Sam's a great guy. He's like, gosh, he's crushing it now. HustleCon. So when were you at Hustle?
Yeah. I was at HustleCon back in, this must have been, I think, 2019.
Shit, I think I was there.
Okay,
2018.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah.
probably
and I
like
went
across the town.
Yeah, we probably did. But yeah, I went with a friend kind of on a whim. He was like, hey, I got an extra ticket. You should come. It'd be fun to hang out in Oakland for the weekend. And I was like, okay, cool. And I went out, and, at those things. And as you know, Jar, it's like, everyone's like, what are you working on?
Yeah.
What's your stealth startup?
Yeah. Which is side hustle? Which is side hustle?
Yeah. And I didn't have like a great answer. And so I like lied, and was just like, I'm building the first like mushroom based food company. And 9 out of 10 people were like, don't care, not tech, don't care.
Yeah.
Irrelevant to me. Like, see you later. And one guy who was he's an angel investor through the Kiretsu group, which I think is like a broad group. And
yeah, they usually do like real estate and stuff too. Yeah. That's like
I don't know. And he was like, oh, he's like, I think that's really cool. He's like, I actually think that's like kind of the head of the market. Who would really like this is Sam Parr. Like, let me go introduce you to him, and like, you should pitch him. And I'm like, okay, fuck it. And so he brings me over, and I remember it so clearly, Jarie, and you're gonna know exactly what I'm about to describe here.
Yeah.
It's like during one of the the networking happy hours, and Sam's standing there, and there's like 15 people like suckling at his knee, like trying to like get his business card. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sam was always very popular. He still is, but yeah.
Yeah. And all these people are like, tell us your secrets. Everyone's like looking up at him, and I'm like, whatever, dude. I'm like, I'll talk to that guy if I talk to him, but I'm not going to like stand there and like lose all my dignity to like try and get this man's business card. And then he's just never going to reply to my email. Like, and so anyways, this guy, Mike, goes in and he cuts off like everybody else. He's like trying to talk to him, and he's like, Sam, like, you should listen to this kid, Parker. Like, I think he has something that kind of gives a cool idea that you'd be interested in. And Sam's like, oh yeah, cool. Like, yeah, what's up, I'm Sam? And everybody there is like side-eye glaring, which is pretty good. And I'm like, yeah, like, I'm building the first mushroom-based food startup. I think this market's really interesting. I have this profound experience through this dieting, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, like, sounds really cool. Like, I'm really bullish on mushrooms. Like, here's my card. And everybody like watched the hand on the card. And he's like, yeah, like, drop me an email. Like, yeah, I'll talk to you soon. And then I like turn, and everybody just like sort of side eyes me and goes back to him. It was so funny.
Well, he's that charismatic. It's so funny, because if you talk to him about like his trajectory, and like, the guy's a fountain of just absolute idea. Like, I always tell him, anything you start, I'm going to be a part of. Like, the first thing, I'm looking at okay, I'm in, right? Yeah. He did this one, when they did trends, right? They had the Hustle, and then trend, first one into trend. He did another class about like ideation boot camp. I'm in, right? He did Hampton, I'm not a startup founder right now, so I couldn't do it. But my friend Rob, he's like, I'm in. Like,
Did you
what-
did you get in on his writing thing? I don't know.
uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Copy
yeah.
that.
I joined his writing thing. Yeah, I
Copy this,
liked it
yeah.
a lot.
No,
Um,
he'll tell you. I mean, so him and is it Neville? So copywriting course is Neville. I think it's Neville. I always forget his name, but they're like best buds. They'll live awesome together, right? Well, one of the things that's very powerful about why, and he'll tell you this, like why he's so successful, is just he learned how to really write well. Like just knows how to write well. Just can tell a story and he can do it. And how he did that was he just like copied great writing. And if you listen to great writers, and if you listen to like any back in the day, like even Hunter S. Thompson would just copy great writing. Stephen Pressfield, like all these guys, like they just like, I have to get it in my brain. This is what good writing is, or they read a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's just
just quickly on that point. So yesterday I had a couple hours, and so I went to a coffee shop, and have you come across this?
Yep,
book?
the ad we copy. Yep, well, Bible.
And I just spent like 3 hours just like reading and writing.
Yep.
And because to me, I kind of agree with copywriting being like a master skill. And it's something, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and that is just to practice writing almost.
It's yeah. I mean, there's another great book that you should get called The Boron Letters. By
Boron Letters?
Yeah, Boron, the Boron Letters. Gary Halbert. So Gary Halbert is probably one of the top 5 direct mail copywriters on the planet. He's dead now. His son now runs his empire, so to speak. The Boron Letters is a master's class in writing direct mail copy. And the reason why it's just so powerful is Boron is a federal penitentiary that he happened to find himself in because of tax evasion or something. And so he's writing letters to his son about, this is how I'm, it's this thick. It's just, it's an 8.5 by 11. It's real small. The type is like all like typewriter type. Yeah. But you just read these letters, and then his son's name, I think, is Bond. And so his son will say, hey, this is what he means, and this is how you can apply it. And it's like, it's, not like, the advertising one that you just set up, Sugarman, which is fantastic. There's just a bunch of really good ones. The guy on advertising, what's his name? Hopkins, who did the scientific advertising, which is another one. All these are just fundamental writing. Yeah. But he would go through and he's like explaining, okay, this is how you write the copy. This is why. He's like, some of these letters, I write these sales letters. I haven't changed these sales letters in years because they just written well. People resonate. And to your point, writing is so fundamental to entrepreneurship and so fundamental to any kind of business that if you're not practicing every day and getting better, and even, like we mentioned a little bit about AI. Right. If you want to,
I was just about to go there.
Yeah. If you want to truly use AI in the right way, you need to be able to tell it what to do through writing. Like explain it, and it's mind blowing when you
totally. And just kind of on the AI topic, and there it's like fundamental belief. Like, well, first of all, AI prompters, that's going to be like the next like comp sci, like super well paid, kind of probably a pretty chill gig if you're really good at it. But the other point as well is like, I feel like a lot of the current AI tools, what they're spitting out is copy and writing. Mm-hmm. And we were briefly chatting about this before we hopped on, but like people who don't know if it's good or not are going to be like, oh, this is great. And then, 99% of people are going to be like, I know an AI wrote that and it's trash. Yeah. Versus like, if you're a good writer and you understand good writing, you can then start to train the AI model and provide examples and provide feedback for it to use for then the AI model to be generating really good copy. Right.
Yeah.
And so it sort of allows you to sort of, double up that effort, but you in the first case have to understand what is good writing and be able to see it and be able to produce it or at least find it. Right.
Yeah. And I also think that's, Sam's, I think it's called Copy That, which is his email.
I think so too.
Copywriting.
And I was just thinking the Boron letters, I recognize those because of Copy That.
Yeah. He probably talked about it because it's, again, there's like a half a dozen to a dozen books that are just fundamental to writing, like Stephen King's on writing, it's Stephen King, like learn from Stephen King, Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. Like if you are any kind of creative, I don't care who you are, if you're not reading The War of Art, like you're missing out, man. Like
Oh
it
God, I'm
is
missing out.
well, it's because he encapsulates the resistance to you doing your work, right? Like when you look at an entrepreneur, and one of our major flaws, but also one of our major advantages is that we just sort of get focused in on like I want to build something. I like this. I'm just obsessed with building something, right? Because you just go down the rabbit hole. One of the problems with that is that what you tend to do if you're not disciplined is you tend to do the things you like to do, not the things you need to do, right? So all the boring quote unquote stuff, which is 95% of being an entrepreneur, is literally like blue collar work of getting it done. And, even though Pressfield talks about it in the writing context of writing a book and pulling through the muse and the creative process, it's similar because the resistance is there to prevent you from doing the work you need to do. And once you realize that and you can accept it, and that's what writer's block doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist. It's the resistance, putting it in your way, because you could write whatever you want. It's just you may have a high standard. Like, we talked about the book that just came out. That took me 5.5 years to write my memoir about my late wife, Jean. I know what it takes to write a good book. Like, that's a really good book. It's been well received. Got high reviews. It's won an award. It's going to win more awards. It's a solid 5.5 year effort. Like, that's what it takes. And I'm like, if I write anything else, is it ever going to be good enough? And that's the resistance, right? Even with entrepreneurs, like, is this really something I can do? And I'm just so curious because, you talked about the mushrooms. And I'm also interested if Sam invested, by the way. Can't get away from answering that. Or did he actually email you back, which from
He did email me back, but so just on that thread, like I went home that night, went on to Fiverr, got somebody to make a logo, and then built a pitch deck as well, and then like sent it out. And he replied, and like he could kind of tell there wasn't anything there, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And he was really nice, and we like had a couple exchanges, but he didn't end up investing. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he's, I would say that for him, he's a pretty straight shooter. Like I can respect his, like he comes up with some good ideas. He's also, very astute. So, okay, cool. Well, Sam, you missed out.
Yeah, I didn't take it personally.
No, never. I don't think you can. So yeah, I mean, so you've got the mushrooms, you've got forage, and just fascinating because, food businesses are tough. Most entrepreneurs, obviously in the tech world, like, they, as you mentioned, all they care about is tech. What was your background before that? Was there any?
Yeah. Well, so slight side. I'm like a part suit. So, growing up, I was so in high school, I started to get really into science, and I had the opportunity to take a pretty cutting edge neuroscience course through MIT for an entire year as a senior. And that was awesome. I became like obsessed with neuroscience. I was like, I'm going to become a neuroscientist. This is where it's at. Like the entire year we actually spent, of like, what do different drugs, how do they impact the brain? So what is caffeine doing to the brain? And like, how does it impact behavior? And then what are the after effects of that? Right. Caffeine, cocaine, marijuana, tobacco, psychedelics. And that was the first time for me where mushrooms, I was like, that's interesting. Like I thought mushrooms were taboo and this horrible thing. And now there's actually some really interesting medicinal value here. So anyways, that was my initial outlook on life. And then I, got to school and pretty quickly realized that it was going to be like 15 years of school. And I don't have patience for that. And so I pivoted and I ended up going into management consulting and was at like a tier 2 management consulting firm, but I still majored in neuroscience. And so my background, like I was really curious about neuroscience and like the impacts on the brain. And I feel like I went through like a biohacker phase, like kind of like I don't know. Did you ever go through one of those phases? You get really into like Tim Ferriss, like
the Ben Greenfield phase is what I call it. Because he literally wrote the whole like, or Tim Ferriss does too, but Ben Greenfield wrote the book on biohacking.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I got on the wave once like Tim Ferriss like popularized it for me, but I know who Ben Greenfield is.
Yeah.
And so, I got into, went into management consulting, and like, I really liked the structure and like the frameworks. And for me, I still look back on that and feel like sometimes kids in college will be like, oh, like, you have a coffee chat or something. And someone's like, I got this idea. I really want to start it. And I always kind of push back on sometimes being like, I really valued that experience. And like, I feel like even just like project management skills that like I had to develop were super valuable. And now I'm like really organized. Right. And like, sometimes I chat with other founders who like aren't organized, like don't know how to like track a project. And so
Yeah,
I definitely really liked those skills. And then but I did get bored and I started to lack autonomy. And that's where like doing the dieting thing, I was like, oh, this is cool. And I want something to do. And that's where I sort of started to spiral into looking at other things.
Interesting.
But to that point in college, I had a couple entrepreneurial spurts. So like in college, I started and built a Twitter account to about 800,000 followers. That was super kind of lucky and opportunistic. So like first day of college, I met a kid and I see him on his phone and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, like nothing. And of course I had to know. So I went and I like walked by him and like looked over his shoulder and I saw he was on a Twitter account that had over 1 million followers. And I was like, okay, what are you doing? Like, I see you're doing something.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, like this is what I do. And he basically, builds these Twitter accounts and then funneled traffic to blogs and then is running ads on blogs. And so on that, like on the spot, I was like, I will send you every single dollar I have in my life savings if you teach me how to do that. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah, I'll send it to you right now. And he's like, okay. And I sent him $3,216, like fourth day of college.
Wow.
I don't know. Sometimes people will be like, oh, like you're really smart. Like I'm an idiot. Like
you're a committed idiot. You're a committed idiot. You're all in, man. You're all
idea. Yeah, but then he showed me and helped me out and built a Twitter account. It was called Shit Your Parents Say. And we ended up building it to $800,000. The best profitable day I ever had was we made $1,000 in one day, funneling traffic to a blog post. Did that. I tried starting like a reversible pant company really for briefly out of college. So I don't know, I have just been curious and wanted to build. I feel like, you and I talk about this entrepreneurial like curiosity and it's hard to define.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other ways I define it is actually from Jason Cohen. He's the founder of WP Engine. If you're familiar with WP Engine,
I've heard the name. I'm not super familiar.
Yeah, they're like $1 billion company now out of Texas. I first found out about him on this mutual like forum we were on called Answers on Startups. That the CTO of HubSpot, Dinesh, was another founder, but I was a moderator or whatever. But he has the best term for it. It's like, I'm an entrepreneur because I want to build an independent life that completes me. And I've always come back to that definition. In fact, it's in the Entrepreneur Ethos, the book. That's where I interviewed him for it. In fact, it was so funny. I got to interview him a couple of months ago, like on the podcast, which, I've known this guy for 15 years, like off and on, not formally, but wow, this is really cool. Like, yeah, it's coming full circle, man. It's pretty really cool. Neat to be back in the day. But I think the desire to create, like as an art, I always think that entrepreneurs are the artists of the business world. I really truly believe that because a lot of business people, like, they're not going to take the risks we take. They're just not. Like, they're going to be, go to the consulting firm, they're going to do the account, whatever it is. They just know the numbers. They're not going to take the leap. They're not going to create something from nothing. They're not going to buck the status quo and like bang up against it hard, right? And so I think the entrepreneur as creative of the business world is a certain mindset of, I want to solve problems, but I want to create stuff because creation just seems like it's an artist thing.
It's just fun, man. There's something that's so fulfilling about it.
Yeah. Even if you fail, it's like,
totally.
At least I tried. And that's a hard mentality. I mean, there's a ton of people that always want to try being an entrepreneur.
Here's kind of an interesting one for you. So there was some point in Forge Forge history where like we were like a week or two away from insolvency, like about to go bankrupt. You know, yeah, I'm 27. I'm a mama's boy at heart for my parents. And when I called my mom and I told her, I said, Mom, I think the business is going to go under next week. And my mom, love my mom, she goes, really disappointed in you saying that. And I'm like, oh, like, thanks for the support. She's like, yeah, I'm just disappointed. Like, it feels like you're giving up, you know? And and I kind of had a hard time like comprehending her response, but it sort of hit me like, I don't know, like, first of all, everybody sees the world in a different way. But for her, like if you're doing something, you better be like 1000% committed, and it like should never fail. And the fact that I had like even accepted it, like she was like, I'm disappointed in you, which I just could not get over. I'm gonna give her a hard time for that, like forever.
Oh, yeah, but also great advice, right?
Totally, no, totally. I was like, for being a mom, like C minus, like for being a partner,
A plus.
A plus.
For being the mentor I needed as an entrepreneur, A plus. Yeah. No, I mean, that's very insightful, right? You know, most times people fail because they quit too early. And, you know, I had a boss that used to say, never let money get in the way of progress. He just would just not tolerate that. And, you know, it was profound statement, but also true. I mean, there's always some progress to be made. Now, of course, there's going to be a point where, look, like I can't do anything about it. You know, if you're something out of your control, some force majeure happens, like a pandemic or whatever, and then you can't, you know, like the world ends. Like it's tough, but most people quit too early. I mean, same with endurance events. I mean, you probably have the same experience. You're like, I'm doing an Ironman, you know, it's a 2.4 mile swim. It's a 110 mile bike or whatever. And it's a marathon, right? There's going to be a point on that marathon where you're like, I want to quit. This is the worst, or the bike, or whatever your bad event is, right? Mine was the bike. I just hate the bike, right? And there's going to be a point where you're just going to want to quit. You're just going to be like, I'm done. This is bullshit. I'm so fed up with this.
Yeah.
And the ones that make it are the ones that recognize that that's going to happen, and they just suck it up for every second. They just like, I just got to make it one more second. Just got one more second. And then all of a sudden happens. You switch, right? You feel it. You feel I can't explain the feeling. It's like, oh, I guess I could do this. It was just me mentally working through it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've done a lot of reflecting on the Ironman experience, and I love that you've done Ironmans. I think there's something now. There's a respect here. I felt like, you know, or one of my takeaways was like, doing the event was challenging, but it wasn't the hard part. The hard part was showing up every day I trained for 6 months every day. It sounds like you did 9. And that was where I found more of my like, fuck this. Like I'm over this. Like I'm in pain. Like I've got 1,000 other things I want to do. I'm exhausted. I don't want to go run 14 miles today and then swim in the pool. Like I'm over that, like super over it. And so, you know, there's a saying now that I've heard, and it's like the hay is in the barn. Like you just have to burn it down on race day. Yeah. And I it's kind of true. Like if you go through the proper training and you do the proper steps and you show up, and it happens. Like it goes through and it's fine. But like the training is so challenging, grueling, and every day for hours.
Yeah. I mean, you win the game in practice is what my coach used to say.
Sure.
My soccer coach in high school. The game is easy compared to practice. I mean, our practices were hell compared to the game was like rest. Like, oh, great, we get to play.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, there's pressure, but I think, you know, same with any kind of elite athlete, elite special forces, the training's worse than the event, right? Like it's like a really like, and that the reason is that when you're in an event and you're doing that sort of stuff, you never rise to the occasion. You fall to your training. The more time you spent sweating and training, just the better, more comfortable you're going to be. Like the example I said, where I'm literally swimming my first 150, 200 meters, and I cramp my literal calves cramp up. I'm like, great, I just started and I'm screwed. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess I got to figure this out. And thankfully, sounds silly, but we were in a river and the water was like 2 or 3 feet deep that we were swimming in. So I
Oh
could
no.
stand up and I could stretch my calves out and then kept going. And it's like you're just like, how could I have ever anticipated that? You know, it's like, okay, deal with it.
But yeah, you dealt with it and you survived, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's way
That's
with
the takeaway.
entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
As well. So how is Forage going? I mean, is it?
It's good, man. It's grueling though. I mean, like we were kind of about to launch a new BL bar line, but like our margin structure has eroded pretty poorly over the last year in our granola line. So we're like having to fix that. We had a really big anticipated launch actually in Asia. There's a pretty big Asia distributor that found us, and like we had some great forecasts. There was also an LOI. We had about 900 retail doors committed. That distributor went under about 6 weeks ago, you know, and so that slashes our forecast like in half. But it's like you're still day by day, you're still like working, and like, you know, for us right now, the big challenge is figuring out the margin structure, because, you know, our co-packer, they had basically like they had all these contracts in place, and they source all the raw ingredient. That they had contracts in place that lasted through COVID. So we got totally sheltered from a lot of the rising prices during COVID. And they all hit about like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And now like we're looking for other co-packers, but like the MOQs aren't working out. And like this co-packer, we already have all the systems set up. And so there's a lot of just like challenges with changing co-packers. And we're trying to figure that out, because like the margin structure we're at right now, like we can't breathe. Like it's bad. So it's just another problem to solve, that which is fun, you know, and as it goes.
Yeah.
So
it's the zigs and zags, right? You just can't let it get you down. Just go. It's crazy.
No, you can't. Another day in the life.
Yeah. It's like, if it's not one thing, it's another.
What's going on in your world? Are you focused on the book?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like,
how are you getting it out there?
Well, I hired a PR firm, which has been great. They're called Book Sparks. My publisher is called Spark Press, so they've got an arm called Book Sparks, and just been, you know, doing podcasts, talking about it. You know, it's interesting. It's a different kind of audience than entrepreneurs, although every entrepreneur has got similar feelings of going up against an enormity of like, oh my God, how am I going to fix this? Well, you know, when your spouse has got leukemia, it's similar, but just the consequences are more dire. You know, like your startup fails, no one's going to die. Well, life succumbs to dots, right? So you get there's that, but I've been finding a lot of different types of folks, a lot of faith-based organizations, a lot of grief groups, a lot of just eclectic, like people I normally would never talk to. But it's been beautiful. You know, I'm looking forward to getting the word out more and seeing how it'll kind of grow. I mean, the reason I wrote it was to help men deal with the issues of this, and you know, it's been getting good reviews. I'm happy with it. You know, it's weird when you publish books, you're always worried. Like, are they gonna like it?
Can imagine.
Yeah. Especially when something takes so long. And I've just been blown away by the response. And I think it's only gonna it's one of those things that sort of just grows over time, you know. There's not a lot of books by men for men. I mean, it's not entirely just for men in grief, but not a lot of folks talk about it, because not a lot of men talk about it. Therefore, they don't write about it.
Totally.
But yeah, looking forward to seeing how it goes. It's just another journey, you know. It's just this long, strange trip, I guess you could say.
Well, yeah, man, that's cool. Yeah, maybe we'll have to connect after this. But one of the AI tools we built, we haven't brought to market yet, but it's built like a whole model. It scrapes the internet for tons of like podcast and influencer information, and then outreach. So like, I actually personally reached out to you, but I built like the model actually would would help do that synonymously.
Oh, cool.
Could just show you how to do it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Parker, it's been great chatting, man. Good luck with everything. Forage. Everyone should go check out and eat some mushrooms. It's good for you.
Thanks, Jarie.
I really appreciate your time, man. Stay
Thanks,
safe.
Jarie. I appreciate being on the show. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Entrepreneur Ethos podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it. My hope is that you learned something that can make you a little bit better. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do share it with friends and review it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also join my email list by visiting theentrepreneurethos.com to get my thoughts on what I'm doing to get better, as well as what I'm working on. You can also pick up my book, The Entrepreneur Ethos, if you want to learn the traits, values, and beliefs that I think we need to build a more ethical, inclusive, and resilient entrepreneur and, frankly, world community. Feel free to follow me on Twitter @TheDailyMBA and let me know if you have any questions or recommendations for a guest you'd like me to talk to. Also, drop me a note if you try anything we talked about on this or any other episode. I'd love to hear what's working for you. Until next time, keep getting better.